The night my wife called me useless, she didn't lower her voice, she raised it, as if she wanted the word to echo inside my bones. We were standing in our kitchen, the overhead light buzzing faintly, the smell of reheated leftovers hanging in the air. She had her phone in one hand, a glass of wine in the other, eyes sharp with disappointment. I remember thinking how familiar that look had become. Honestly, she said, laughing without humor, I don't even know why I'm still with you. You contribute nothing. You're useless. Useless. The word landed harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. I didn't respond. I just stared at the countertop, tracing an invisible crack in the marble with my eyes. Silence had become my defense mechanism over the years. When you don't fight back, people assume they've won. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that I made $1, $2 million a year. Not on paper, not in a way that impressed dinner guests or impressed her parents, but quietly, consistently, and very intentionally hidden. From the outside, I looked like a man drifting through life. I worked from home. No suit, no office, no bragging. My car was old. My clothes were plain. I didn't post success on social media or talk about hustle at parties. To my wife, I was the definition of underachieving. To me, it was survival. Her name is Claire. We met years ago, when neither of us had much. She was ambitious, outspoken, and deeply concerned with appearances. I was quieter, more reserved. At first, our differences balanced each other. She pushed, I supported. We told ourselves that was love. But somewhere along the way, her ambition turned into entitlement, and my silence became permission. Claire worked a high-pressure corporate job, long hours, endless meetings, constant stress. She talked often about promotions, titles, and what real success looked like. And every time she came home exhausted, she looked at me like I was part of the problem. "What did you do today?" she'd ask. And I'd answer honestly but vaguely. Worked, took care of a few things. That answer used to be enough. Over time, it became an insult. She started comparing me to others, her coworkers' husbands, men she followed online. Men who wore watches that cost more than our rent. She didn't hide her disappointment anymore, she weaponized it. "You're too comfortable," she'd say. "You have no drive." I feel like I married potential that never showed up. Each comment chipped away at something. Not my confidence, I had learned to protect that, but my trust. Because while she saw nothing, I saw everything. I saw my dashboards in the early morning hours. I saw the numbers grow month after month. I saw the contracts finalize, the investments mature, the revenue streams stack quietly on top of each other. I had built something real, something powerful, without noise, and I had chosen, very deliberately, not to tell her. At first, it was caution. Money changes people. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I earned. Later, it became a test. I wanted to see how she treated me when she thought I had nothing. The answer was becoming painfully clear. That night in the kitchen, after she called me useless, she shook her head like she was done trying. "I'm carrying this marriage," she said, "financially, emotionally, everything. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I'd chosen better." She walked past me, heels clicking against the floor, and disappeared into the bedroom. The door closed with a soft but final sound. I stood there long after, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling something settle deep in my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was clarity. Claire didn't see me, not really. She saw a role she thought I failed to play. And in her mind, that failure justified every sharp word, every ounce of disrespect. What she didn't know was that the life she believed she deserved, the lifestyle she constantly compared us to, was already within reach. I just hadn't decided who deserved to share it with me. As I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward my home office, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. Another notification, another confirmation, another reminder that while she slept convinced I was useless, I was quietly becoming something she would never expect. And soon, very soon, she was going to learn the truth. After that night in the kitchen, something shifted between us, not dramatically, not all at once, but in quiet, unsettling ways that made my skin prickle. Claire didn't apologize. She never did after moments like that. Instead, she acted as if nothing had happened, which somehow felt worse. The next morning, she moved around the apartment with exaggerated cheerfulness, humming while she made coffee, scrolling through her phone as if the previous night hadn't ended with her calling her own husband useless. I watched her from across the table, noticing things I had ignored before. Her phone never left her hand. Even when she showered, it sat on the sink, screen facing down. When a notification buzzed, she'd flip it over quickly, thumb moving faster than my eyes could follow. If I walked into the room unexpectedly, she'd angle the screen away from me, not abruptly, but instinctively. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. Still, the pattern repeated. She started stepping outside to take calls. Not work calls, those she'd loudly complain about in front of me, but softer ones, taken on the balcony or in the hallway. When I asked who it was, she'd say, "Just a coworker," or "my manager," without looking at me. Once I heard her laugh. It wasn't her usual tired laugh. It was lighter, almost flirtatious. When she came back inside and caught me looking at her, her smile faded just a bit. "What?" she snapped. "Nothing," I said, and that was the truth. I didn't have proof, just a feeling. Money became another point of tension. Claire had always been vocal about finances, but now her complaints sharpened. "We're barely saving anything," she said one evening, scrolling through her banking app. "I feel like I'm drowning and you're just floating." I almost laughed. Almost. I was saving more in a month than she made in a year, multiple times over, but I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. "I thought we were doing okay," I said carefully. "Okay isn't enough," she replied. "Not when everyone else is moving forward. Everyone else. Always everyone else." She began making unilateral financial decisions, expensive dinners, new clothes, weekend trips she didn't invite me on. When I questioned the spending, she turned it around on me. "If you earned more, I wouldn't have to worry so much," she said. That stung, not because it was true, but because she believed it was. The unfairness crept into everything. She stopped asking about my day entirely. Conversations became monologues about her stress, her goals, her frustrations. If I tried to share something, anything, she'd glance at her phone or interrupt. "Can we talk about this later?" she'd say. Later never came. At family gatherings, the disrespect went public. One Sunday at her parents' house, her mother asked what I was working on these days. Before I could answer, Claire jumped in. "He's still figuring things out," she said with a tight smile. "You know how he is." Her father chuckled awkwardly. I smiled politely, feeling heat creep up my neck. Still figuring things out. I wanted to say, "I've figured it out more than you'll ever know," but I didn't. I swallowed it like I always did. That night, lying next to her in bed, I stared at the ceiling while she slept facing away from me. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message preview flashed briefly before disappearing. "Can't wait to see you again." My heart thudded. I told myself it could mean anything. A friend, a coworker, a misunderstanding, but the unease settled deeper, heavier. Over the next few weeks, Claire's schedule changed. Late meetings, team dinners, networking events that ran past midnight. When she came home, she smelled different, new perfume, maybe. Or maybe I was imagining it. "You're acting weird," she said one night when she noticed me watching her too closely. "Am I?" I replied, yes, distant, suspicious. The irony almost made me laugh. "I'm just tired," I said. Well, so am I. She shot back, but I don't have the luxury of checking out. Luxury, if only she knew. Inside, the strain was building, not jealousy, something colder, a growing realization that I had been placed into a box in her mind, and everything I did was filtered through that label. Useless. And once someone decides who you are, they stop seeing who you actually are. I began paying closer attention. Not obsessively, not angrily, but deliberately. I noticed how she dressed differently for work now, how she smiled at messages she didn't show me, how she no longer complained about her job to me, as if she'd found someone else to unload onto, someone who listened, someone she respected. The worst part wasn't the suspicion, it was the loneliness. I lived with a woman who talked around me, not to me, who leaned on me when it suited her and dismissed me when it didn't, who benefited from my emotional support while offering none in return. Late at night, after she fell asleep, I'd sit in my home office, staring at the glow of my monitors, not at numbers this time, but at my reflection in the darkened screen. I asked myself a question I'd avoided for years. If she never finds out the truth, would she ever choose me? The answer terrified me, because deep down I already knew. The red flags were no longer subtle. They were waving right in front of me, daring me to look away. And while Claire continued believing she was carrying a dead weight of a husband, I began preparing quietly, carefully, for the moment when her assumptions would finally collide with reality. She thought she was the one with options. She had no idea how wrong she was. The truth didn't explode into my life all at once. It leaked in slow, poisonous, and undeniable. It started on a Thursday afternoon when Claire forgot her phone at home. That alone was unusual. Her phone was practically an extension of her body. She checked it before brushing her teeth, during meals, even in the middle of conversations. But that day, she rushed out late, heels clacking, muttering about a meeting, and left it charging on the kitchen counter. I noticed it immediately. At first, I didn't touch it. I wasn't proud of the thoughts already circling my mind. I told myself that trust meant restraint, that love meant giving her the benefit of the doubt. Then the phone buzzed. Once, twice, again. The screen lit up. Mark, work. Last night was amazing. Wish we didn't have to pretend today. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, hoping ridiculously that I had misread it, that there was some harmless explanation waiting to jump out and save me from what my instincts had been screaming for weeks. Another message followed. Mark, when are you telling him? Telling him. My hands felt numb as I picked up the phone. I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. The previews kept coming, each one landing like a blow. Mark, you deserve better than a guy who contributes nothing. Mark, you shouldn't have to settle. There it was, not just cheating, contempt. I sat down slowly, the edge of the chair digging into my legs as my pulse roared in my ears. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that shows up right before everything breaks. When Claire came home that evening, she knew immediately. She froze in the doorway, eyes darting to the phone on the table, then to my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. That scared her more than any outburst ever could. Who's Mark? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, she looked like someone caught between lies, deciding which one might hurt less. He's a coworker, she said weakly. Try again. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she sighed, dropping her bag like she was exhausted, not guilty. It just happened, she said. I didn't plan it. I laughed once, short and sharp. You never plan to betray someone, you just choose to. Her eyes hardened. You weren't there, she snapped emotionally, financially, any way that mattered. I felt alone. That word alone coming from her almost made me dizzy. So you slept with him, I said quietly, and talked about me like I was nothing. She crossed her arms. I didn't say you were nothing. I said you don't contribute, which is true. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not shattered, but split cleanly down the middle. Not heartbreak, recognition. This wasn't a mistake fueled by loneliness. This was a pattern justified by disrespect. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had replaced me in her mind long before her body followed. And the money? I asked suddenly. She blinked. What money? The joint account. I said, the savings, the unexplained transfers. Her expression shifted. Too slow. I needed help, she said defensively. Mark helped me invest. You wouldn't understand. I felt cold. You moved our money, I asked. Our? She scoffed. It's mostly mine anyway. You barely earn anything. There it was again. The lie she lived in. She had been funneling money, my money, though she didn't know it, into an account Mark controlled. Not just cheating, financial betrayal. Planning an exit while mocking the man she thought couldn't stop her. I stood up slowly. Do you love him? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I don't know, she said. But I know I can't keep pretending with you. Pretending. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything. To watch her face collapse under the weight of the truth. That the useless man standing in front of her was worth more in a year than Mark might see in a lifetime. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I nodded, calm, controlled. Okay. I said, then we're done. Her eyes widened slightly, clearly expecting a fight. Tears begging. You're taking this very well, she said cautiously. I smiled faintly. You've already decided I'm nothing, I replied. There's not much left to lose. That night, she slept in the guest room. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my office, staring at the numbers on my screen, not with comfort this time, but with clarity. Everything I had built, everything I had protected, she thought she had won. She thought she had traded up. What she didn't realize was that she had just shown me exactly who she was. At the exact moment I finally decided who I would be to her. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be quiet. The morning after everything came out, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a place I'd once lived in but no longer belonged to. Claire had already left for work, or maybe for Mark. I didn't bother checking. The guest room door was open, the bed neatly made, as if she'd slept peacefully while my world rewired itself piece by piece. I stood alone in the kitchen, the same place where she had called me useless, and poured myself a cup of coffee I barely tasted. My hands didn't shake anymore. The storm inside me had passed, leaving something colder behind, focus. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I wasn't trying to understand her. I was trying to understand myself. I replayed every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I realized something painful but liberating. My silence hadn't been kindness. It had been avoidance. I had hidden my success to test her love, but in doing so, I had also hidden my boundaries. And people without boundaries get used. I walked into my office and sat down, opening files I hadn't touched in a while, not financial dashboards, but documents, agreements, account histories, the joint account statements Claire had dismissed so casually. What I saw made my jaw tighten. She hadn't just moved money once or twice. There was a pattern, regular transfers, small enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but consistent enough to add up. She had been planning this for months, maybe longer, and Mark wasn't just a coworker. He was a financial advisor at her company. Unregistered, unqualified, convenient, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and let out a slow breath. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Something clicked then. Not rage, not vengeance, but resolve. I had spent so long proving to myself, to the world, that I didn't need validation, that success could be quiet, that power didn't have to announce itself. But there's a difference between humility and invisibility. And I had been invisible in my own marriage. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, a man I'd retained years ago for business matters, someone who knew how to listen without asking unnecessary questions. "I need to protect assets," I said calmly, immediately. He didn't sound surprised. He rarely did. The second call was to my bank. Accounts were frozen. Access was restricted. Alerts were activated. The third call was the hardest. I called my father. We hadn't spoken in months, not because of conflict, but because life gets in the way when you're pretending everything is fine. When I told him what had happened, I expected anger on my behalf. Instead, he was quiet. Then he said something that stayed with me. "Son, being underestimated is a gift," he said, "but only if you know when to stop giving it away." That night, when Claire came home, I noticed the shift immediately. She went to the kitchen, opened her laptop, and frowned. "Hey," she called out, "did you move money?" "No." I replied from the living room. I protected it. She walked in, eyes sharp. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said evenly, "that until things are legally sorted, you don't have access to shared funds." Her face flushed. "You can't do that." "I already did." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as a disappointment. Not as a burden, as an obstacle. "You're being petty," she snapped. "This is why I felt trapped." I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "No," I said. "This is why you underestimated me." She laughed, forced, brittle. "Please, you don't even make enough to." I stopped her with a raised hand. "Don't," I said quietly. Something in my voice made her hesitate. I walked past her, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To take back my life," I said. "You should do the same." That night, I didn't come home. I checked into a hotel overlooking the city. The same city I had quietly conquered from behind screens and spreadsheets while pretending to be small. I stood by the window, lights stretching endlessly below, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not arrogance, not revenge, self-respect. I didn't want to humiliate her. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. Over the next few days, I moved deliberately. Evidence was compiled. Transactions were traced. Conversations were documented. Mark's role became clearer and riskier. For him, I didn't rush. I didn't lash out. I prepared. Because the strongest response to betrayal isn't chaos. It's control. Claire kept calling, texting, accusing, pleading. At one point, she even apologized. An apology that focused more on what she stood to lose than what she had done. I didn't respond. For the first time, she was the one sitting in uncertainty. And me, I was done being invisible. The man she called useless had finally stopped asking for her approval and started deciding what justice looked like. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't be shouted. It would be undeniable. Revenge, I learned, isn't about anger. It's about patience. From the outside, Claire still thought she was winning. She moved freely, confidently texting, meeting Mark, telling herself a story where she was the victim who had finally chosen better. To her, I was a temporary inconvenience, a man too weak, too broke, too passive to be dangerous. That belief was the most powerful weapon I had. I didn't confront her again. I didn't threaten. I didn't expose anything prematurely. Instead, I disappeared just enough to make her comfortable. Predictable, harmless, and while she relaxed, I worked. Step 1 was proof. I went back months, emails, transaction histories, shared cloud folders she forgot we both had access to. Claire was careless in the way people are when they believe they're smarter than everyone else. I found calendar invites labeled as late meetings that matched hotel charges, expense reports that didn't add up, messages deleted from her phone but backed up automatically to the cloud. Mark appeared everywhere once I knew where to look. He wasn't just her affair partner. He was advising her on how to quietly move money out before things got messy. I found voice notes she'd recorded for herself, reminders spoken out loud, transfer after bonus clears. Don't tell him yet, he'll panic. I saved everything. Step 2 was timing. I could have confronted her with the evidence immediately. I could have blown up her world in a single afternoon. But explosions are messy. They leave debris, and sometimes sympathy. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity. So I waited. I let her believe her narrative was solid, that Mark was her upgrade, that I was retreating because I had nothing left to stand on. When she finally asked to talk, I agreed. We met at a cafe near her office, neutral ground, public. She arrived confident, dressed sharply, wearing the kind of smile people practice in mirrors. I think we've both cooled off, she said, stirring her coffee. We should handle this like adults. I nodded. I agree. She leaned in slightly. I've spoken to a lawyer. I just want what's fair. Fair. I almost smiled. Of course. I said. We'll do everything properly. She relaxed. That was the moment I knew she still believed she was in control. Step 3 was containment. Behind the scenes, my lawyer filed motions Claire didn't expect, ones that froze more than accounts. Ones that required disclosure, transparency, ones that turned her quiet planning into documented obligation. At the same time, I reached out to Mark not directly, but through channels he couldn't ignore, compliance departments, regulatory boards, questions framed as curiosity, not accusation. Can you clarify your relationship with a client named Claire? Were you registered to advise on these transfers? Is this account authorized? I didn't accuse, I asked, and questions make people nervous. Mark started pulling back. Claire noticed he's under a lot of stress, she told me during one of our now polite conversations. Work stuff, I nodded sympathetically. Step 4 was exposure controlled, precise. I didn't tell friends. I didn't tell family. I let Claire talk. She told people I was unstable, that I was jealous, that I had suddenly become weird about money. Every exaggeration, every half-truth made the contrast sharper, because when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just contradict her. It would dismantle her credibility. The tension built quietly. Claire began calling more often, not angry calls anymore, but probing ones. Are you hiding something? She asked once. No. I said calmly, are you? Silence. She laughed nervously. You're acting different. I've changed. I replied, that happens. Behind her confidence, cracks were forming. Mark became distant. Meetings were canceled. His messages grew shorter, less affectionate. She still thought she was ahead, but now she was guessing. And guessing is where control slips. The final piece of the plan wasn't about punishment. It was about revelation. I scheduled mediation, neutral room, neutral mediator, lawyers present, documents ready. Claire walked in that day looking prepared. Assertive, almost smug. She still believed I was the man she'd labeled useless. She still believed she was negotiating from a position of strength. I sat across from her, calm, hands folded, listening as she laid out her demands: alimony, asset division, compensation for emotional labor. When she finished, the mediator turned to me. Your response? I slid a folder across the table. Before we discuss numbers, I said evenly, there are a few facts everyone here should understand. Claire frowned. What's this, reality? I replied. She opened the folder, her face drained of color. Bank statements, transfer records, messages, dates, names, Mark's name. Her lawyer stiffened. The mediator stopped taking notes. For the first time since this began, Claire looked at me not with disdain, but with fear. And I hadn't even revealed everything yet. Because the final truth, the one about who I really was, what I really earned, and how deeply she had misjudged me, was still waiting. And when it landed, it would change everything. The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like even the air had decided to listen. Claire stared down at the folder in her hands, flipping through pages too quickly, as if speed might erase what was written there. Her lawyer leaned closer, his jaw tightening with every document. Across the table, the mediator had stopped pretending this was routine. "What is this?" Claire asked, her voice suddenly thin. "Evidence," I said calmly, "of theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." She laughed, sharp, desperate. "That's ridiculous. You're trying to scare me." Her lawyer didn't laugh. "Claire," he said quietly, "you didn't tell me about these transfers, or about Mark." She turned to him, panic flickering across her face. "He's twisting things. He doesn't even understand money." That was my cue. "For the record," I said, folding my hands on the table, "I understand money very well." I nodded to my lawyer. He slid a second folder forward, thicker, heavier. "This," my lawyer said, "is a full disclosure of my client's financial standing." Claire scoffed. "He barely earns." She stopped. Her eyes locked onto the first page. Income summaries, verified statements. "Tax filings." Her lips parted slightly. "No," she whispered. My lawyer continued, voice steady. "My client earns approximately $1.2 million annually, consistently, for the past 3 years." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. The mediator's pen clattered onto the table. Claire's face drained of all color. That's impossible," she said, looking at me like I had just confessed to being someone else entirely. "You work from home, I was quiet. I corrected, "There's a difference." She shook her head, eyes wide. "You lied to me." I protected myself, I said, which, as it turns out, was necessary. Her lawyer leaned back slowly, recalculating everything he thought he knew. "If this is accurate," he said carefully, "then the financial landscape of this case changes completely." "Yes," my lawyer replied. "It does." Claire turned to me, voice rising. "You let me think you were nothing. You decided I was nothing." I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You said it, repeatedly, to my face, to other people. To the man you cheated with while stealing money you thought I wouldn't notice." Mark's name landed like a slap. The mediator cleared his throat. "We may need to pause this session." "No," Claire said suddenly. "Wait," she was unraveling now. "This doesn't change what he owes me. I supported him emotionally. I carried this marriage." My lawyer opened the folder again. "Actually, it changes everything." He slid over one final document, a formal complaint filed that morning. "Against Mark, unlicensed financial advising, conflict of interest, facilitation of asset misappropriation." Claire's eyes scanned the page faster and faster. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I ask questions," I said. "The kind that require answers." Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it, froze, another buzz. She didn't need to answer it to know. Mark was collapsing. The mediator stood. "Given the new information, this mediation is concluded. Further discussions will occur through legal channels." Claire looked up at me, her voice breaking for the first time. Not in anger, but fear. "You ruined me," she said. I stood slowly. "No," I replied, "I stopped you from ruining me." She reached for my arm. "Please, we can fix this. You don't have to do this." I looked down at her hand. Gently removed it. "You called me useless," I said. "You cheated on me, you stole from me, and you did it all because you thought I was weak." I met her eyes. This is what weak looks like when it finally stands up. Outside the building, the world kept moving. Cars passing, people laughing, life uninterrupted. Claire stumbled out behind me, her phone pressed to her ear now, voice shaking as she begged someone, anyone, for help. I didn't look back. By the end of the week, Mark was suspended pending investigation. Claire's access to all contested funds was revoked. Her version of events collapsed under documentation she couldn't talk her way out of, and me, I walked back into my life like a man reclaiming stolen ground. The revenge wasn't loud. It was surgical. The woman who mocked me for being useless learned in the most public and permanent way possible that she had mistaken silence for weakness and humility for failure. And the truth, that realization cost her everything. The weeks after the mediation passed quietly, but not peacefully for everyone. For Claire, the world she had so carefully curated began to unravel in plain sight. Mark's suspension turned into a formal investigation. Then came the audits, then the quiet but devastating email from his firm. Employment terminated, effective immediately. The man she thought she was upgrading to stopped answering her calls altogether. When survival is at stake, loyalty is the first thing people drop. Claire tried to spin the story at first. She told friends I had hidden money to control her, that I was manipulative, that I had changed overnight. But narratives don't survive evidence. Once the legal filings became public record, people started asking questions she couldn't dodge. Why were there unauthorized transfers? Why was her coworker managing her finances? Why did timelines overlap so neatly? Her circle shrank, invitations stopped coming, messages went unanswered. The same people who once nodded sympathetically at her complaints about her useless husband now avoided eye contact when my name came up, because suddenly I wasn't useless. I was the man she misjudged. The divorce finalized quickly after that. No dramatic courtroom showed, just signatures, settlements, and silence. Claire didn't get what she had demanded. In fact, she walked away with far less than she expected. Consequences have a way of recalculating entitlement. The apartment was sold. I let her keep most of the furniture. Objects felt meaningless now. What mattered was space, physical and emotional. I moved into a place overlooking the water. Simple, clean, quiet. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. Work flourished not because I chased it harder, but because I no longer carried the weight of being diminished every day. My focus sharpened, my confidence returned. I stopped hiding not out of spite, but out of self-respect. People started seeing me differently, not because of the money, but because I stood differently, spoke differently. No longer apologizing for existing. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Claire by accident at a grocery store. She looked smaller, not physically but energetically. Her shoulders were tense, eyes tired. She saw me, froze, then forced a smile. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. An awkward pause followed. "You looks good," she said. "So do you." I lied politely. She nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about everything." "I know," I replied. She hesitated. If I had. I shook my head gently. It wouldn't have changed anything. She looked up, confused. "Because love doesn't start after a bank statement," I said, "and respect doesn't wait for proof." That was the last real conversation we ever had. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief, because the greatest justice wasn't watching her lose everything. It was realizing I no longer needed her to understand my worth. To anyone watching this who's been mocked, underestimated, or betrayed by someone who thought you were nothing, remember this. People treat you based on the version of you they believe exists, but they live with the consequences of being wrong. My wife called me useless because she measured value in noise, status, and appearances. She never imagined that silence could hold strength, or that the man she belittled was quietly building a life far bigger than the one she tried to steal. In the end, she didn't lose me because I was weak. She lost me because I was strong enough to walk away without proving myself until it mattered. And when the truth finally stood up on its own, it didn't need revenge, it spoke for itself. So let me ask you, have you ever been betrayed by someone who underestimated you? Have you ever stayed quiet while being treated like you were nothing? Tell your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about betrayal, revenge, and quiet victories, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't getting even, it's being so far ahead that the people who doubted you can never catch up